there, Richard Pavlidis here. Welcome to another lesson, and today we're going to talk about the altered scale. Now, the altered scale is one of my favourite scales. There are a lot of ways to think about the altered scale, so I'll take you through a few of those now. Basically, it's derived from the melodic minor scale. So it's the seventh mode of a melodic minor scale, meaning that if you take a melodic minor scale and start that scale playing all the same notes of that scale, but start it on the seventh degree, then you'll end up with an altered scale. So for example, here I have a D flat melodic minor scale. And I'm going to play that scale. I'm going to start it from C to C instead of D flat to D flat, playing all the same notes, and I'll end up with a C altered scale, C7 altered scale. Another way to think about it is that it's a dominant scale, so a Mixolydian scale, with everything about it altered, everything altered in every way it can be, whilst still retaining the quality of a dominant chord, dominant scale. So the tonic has to remain the same, the third has to remain the same, and the seventh has to remain the same. But everything else is altered in every way it can be. So we have the second is flattened and sharpened. The fourth can't be flattened because we've already got that note there, so that's sharpened. Fifth can't be flattened because we've already got that note there, so that's sharpened. Sixth, same thing. So we end up with a scale that we can use over dominant chords. Another way to think about it is it's also known as a diminished whole tone scale. So it starts off in a half step whole step pattern, half whole semitone tone, like a diminished scale. And then the second half of the scale is a whole tone scale. And then finally, it's also known as a super Locrian scale because it's almost exactly the same as a standard Locrian scale, except it has a major third instead of a fourth, instead of a perfect fourth. So a few different ways to think about it, but basically it's derived from the melodic minor scale. So practicing our melodic minor patterns is a really, really good way to start. And the application of this scale, in a jazz context at least, is that it's used over a dominant chord. It's used to create tension over a dominant chord, a 5 chord, leading to the resolution on the 1 chord. And this is especially true in the case of a minor 5-1 or a minor 2-5-1. And the reason for that is that in the altered scale, you have the minor third of the tonic chord. So for example, in this C7 altered scale, we have a G sharp or A flat, which is the minor third of F minor. Okay, C being the fifth of F. So this scale fits particularly well in the context of a minor 5-1. It leads particularly well onto a minor chord. So it's applicable over pretty much any type of dominant chord because, as I said before, it's altered in every way it can be. So pretty much any alteration that you can think of is going to be covered by the altered scale. So the way we'll start practicing this scale is to first just learn it up and down, pretty simple. We then learn the arpeggio. So we have a couple of options here. Because there's no perfect fifth in this scale, we can either flatten the fifth or sharpen the fifth. So we can end up with a sharp 11 arpeggio or an augmented arpeggio. We then practice the scale in different patterns. For example, we can practice it in thirds, or really any of the patterns that we worked on with our major scales all the way back in lesson 1. So all those patterns really are applicable to any harmony, any sound, any scale that you're working on. We then try and use the scale to improvise over a static chord. So in this case, any type of dominant chord. to practice it is in the context of 2-5-1. So I'm going to give you some examples now of the altered scale being used over a major 2-5-1 and then over a minor 2-5-1. Now the other thing that the altered scale really leads you on to very smoothly is the idea of substitutions. So the idea of playing out, particularly a tritone substitution chord over the dominant chord in a 2-5-1. Now, tritone substitution is something we'll get into in a little bit more depth very soon. But just as a very short introduction to it, because the dominant chord is where all the tension is in this progression, we're able to play a lot of different out or dissonant sounds over that chord and still retain, I guess, the kind of direction and the momentum of this chord progression. And one very common way to do this is by replacing it with a chord a tritone away. So in this context, C7 would become F sharp or G flat 7. And a C7 altered scale, C altered scale, is the same scale, exactly the same notes as an F sharp or G flat Lydian dominant scale. So I know this is a lot of information and it will be all explained in time, but just as a very simple guide, we're well on the way to playing substitutions without even really knowing it yet. So anyway, there's the altered scale. It's a basic guide. Have a practice of that. Remember to download the PDF in all 12 keys and see how you go. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future lessons, please do let me know. Happy practicing and see you next week. Cheers.